Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of drlab. Imagine the excitement of a newlywed couple on their honeymoon, the anticipation of starting a new chapter of their lives together, and the promise of unforgettable memories. Christy Chen and Bradley Dawson had all of this ahead of them when they arrived in Fiji to celebrate their new life as husband and wife. They were staying on Turtle Island, an idyllic, luxurious, and secluded paradise known for its exclusive clientele and breathtaking beauty. But what was supposed to be a time of joy, love, and excitement quickly turned into a nightmare. Just 48 hours into their dream honeymoon, Christy Chen was found brutally murdered in their bungalow. The man who was supposed to cherish her for the rest of their lives, the man who vowed to love, honor, and protect her, was the very one responsible for her death. The shock of this incident not only devastated Christy's family, but also stunned everyone who knew her. I have to say, when I first came across this case, I couldn't shake the confusion and anger that followed me as I learned more about it. How could someone go from sharing vows of eternal love to ending that very life so violently, especially on what should have been the most joyful trip of their life? It's honestly infuriating to think that someone could betray another in such a deep and shocking way. In this case, one question lingers above all others. How could something so beautiful and hopeful spiral into such a horrifying tragedy? What happened in those final hours of their honeymoon, the sense of betrayal, the loss, and the unthinkable violence that Christy experienced just breaks my heart. You can't help but feel anger, sorrow, and disbelief as you follow this story. Christy Chen was no stranger to hard work, dedication, and passion. An only child, she was raised with love and care and quickly developed a reputation as a hardworking, kind, and thoughtful individual. Before meeting Bradley, Christy was living a fulfilling life in Memphis, Tennessee, where she had become a successful pharmacist after previously building a beloved bakery. She was a woman with dreams, a career she adored, and plans for her future with her new husband. But everything changed when Bradley Dawson entered her life. Christy and Bradley's relationship developed quickly. Some say perhaps too quickly. They met in November of 2021, and after a whirlwind romance, they were married in February of 2022. Though Christy's friends and family wanted nothing more than for her to find happiness, there were some who questioned the speed at which their relationship moved, especially considering Bradley's previous marriage, which had ended just months before his union with Christy. Bradley worked for a non-profit organization that helped troubled youth, which gave him an image of caring and compassion. Yet what many failed to see were the cracks in his personality, the jealousy and controlling behavior that would later emerge in shocking ways. Despite her growing concerns, Christy went forward with the marriage. She seemed genuinely happy, and for many who saw them together, the couple appeared to be a perfect match. But as the days and months passed, some of her friends began noticing odd behaviors from Bradley. Small signs of insecurity that hinted at a controlling side, though nothing drastic enough to alarm anyone at the time. Bradley's behavior was erratic at times, especially around other women. Christy, however, seemed to overlook the signs, hoping that these were just isolated incidents or misunderstandings. Perhaps they were just part of the honeymoon phase where everything seemed perfect at first glance. But deep down, there were subtle cracks that she chose to ignore. Those cracks would soon grow into a devastating fissure that would destroy her future. On July 7, 2022, Christy and Bradley flew to Fiji for their honeymoon, staying on the exclusive Turtle Island resort. Christy, who had spent much of her life traveling with her family, was thrilled to be in such a gorgeous and private place. The resort was not only luxurious, but secluded, offering a completely immersive and intimate experience. With turquoise waters, white sandy beaches, and private bungalows, it was the perfect setting for a fresh start to their marriage. The trip was the culmination of their dream wedding, and Christy was looking forward to what was sure to be a blissful getaway. The resort, renowned for its exclusivity, only allowed a handful of guests at any given time, no more than 14 couples at a time. The resort catered to the rich and famous, offering a lavish and pampered experience. Christy and Bradley were fortunate to have the trip paid for by Christy's parents, who wanted to give them the honeymoon of a lifetime. Little did they know this would be the last time they would ever get to see their daughter alive. The charm of the island was undeniable, and Christy had every reason to believe that this would be the beginning of a long and happy future. Yet just 2 days into their dream honeymoon, everything would shatter. Christy's bright future, full of promise, was cruelly and violently snatched away from her. The morning of July 9th, 2022 began like any other. Christy and Bradley had planned to enjoy the luxurious offerings of the resort, starting their day with a beautiful breakfast. However, when the couple failed to show up at the scheduled breakfast, the resort staff began to grow concerned. It wasn't completely out of the ordinary. Honeymoons are filled with romantic moments, and sometimes couples want to sleep in. But as the day wore on, and they missed lunch as well, the staff began to wonder what might be going on. It wasn't until the resort's butler entered their private bungalow to clean that the first signs of horror began to unfold. The butler had been there earlier that morning but noticed a "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door, so he had left the couple alone. This time the sign was gone, and he entered the bungalow to find it in disarray. At first glance, nothing seemed overtly suspicious. However, as the butler began cleaning the bathroom, he found something that would haunt him forever: Christy's lifeless body lying in a pool of blood. The room was a crime scene. Blood was splattered across the floor, and broken glass from a window lay scattered around. Christy's body was found wedged between the toilet and the wall, with injuries so severe it was clear she had been violently attacked. The butler immediately alerted the resort manager, who called the authorities. But there was one crucial detail: Bradley was nowhere to be found. Within hours of the discovery of Christy's body, the authorities began their investigation. They quickly noticed that Bradley had not only fled the scene, but had also intentionally left behind his phone and smartwatch. These devices could have easily tracked his movements, but he was smart enough to know that. What he did take with him was his passport and wallet, proof that he was running from something and someone. Bradley had clearly planned his escape. He had taken a kayak and paddled off into the night, likely hoping to reach one of the neighboring islands to lay low and disappear. The authorities weren't sure where he had gone, but a search was immediately launched. After 36 hours of searching, the authorities found Bradley on a nearby island far from the luxury of Turtle Island. He was disheveled, drunk, and covered in cuts and bruises, which he explained as injuries sustained from falling on the coral. But there was more to his story. According to a local man named Manoa, who had found Bradley, the suspect was not only drunk, but also extremely agitated, repeating the words, "Please, I need to call the police," and we had a fight. When pressed for more information, Bradley offered little except that he had fled because of the argument he had with Christy the night before. This provided some context to the timeline, but it was far from the whole truth. The police immediately detained him and brought him back to the island, where he was arrested and charged with the murder of his wife. Bradley's arrest marked the beginning of a long investigation into the events that led to Christy's death. Authorities learned from other guests and staff members at the resort that things had begun to take a dark turn on the night of July 8th. The resort had hosted a family fun night where guests mingled with staff and their families. At first, the evening was filled with laughter and music, as many of the guests were drinking and celebrating. But soon things soured. Bradley, who had been drinking, began acting inappropriately, dancing suggestively with another woman. Christy, visibly upset, confronted him. The couple left the party, continuing their argument on the beach before retreating to their bungalow. What happened next would be the key to understanding how this honeymoon turned into a tragedy. By now, witnesses from nearby bungalows had reported hearing raised voices followed by a blood-curdling scream, one that echoed across the tranquil island, shattering the illusion of paradise. It wasn't just any scream, but one that conveyed immense fear and pain. Then just as quickly, the sounds of the argument died down, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Despite the gravity of the situation, the resort staff did not intervene. One of the staff members had noticed the tension between the newlyweds and overheard parts of their fight, but no one did anything to stop it. It wasn't until much later that a complaint was lodged, but by that time it was far too late. The silence that followed the scream would soon be shattered once more, this time by the arrival of police on the island. But it wasn't the officers that first alerted them to the crime. It was the eerie quiet of the bungalow that raised alarm. Christy, the woman who had been full of life just days earlier, had been taken from this world in the most violent way imaginable. When Bradley was eventually found, he was drunk and disoriented. He attempted to justify his actions to the authorities, claiming that everything had happened in a state of confusion and panic. In a convoluted confession, he stated that after a night of drinking and dancing, the fight with Christy had escalated, leading her to hit him first. In his version of events, he claimed he had lost control during the altercation. However, the specifics of the fight were unclear, and it was difficult to discern what was truth and what was merely an excuse. Bradley's confession changed with every passing day. Initially, he described how the fight became physical, with Christy allegedly striking him first, causing him to retaliate in a drunken rage. According to him, the next thing he knew, Christy was lying lifeless on the floor, and he was overwhelmed with panic. Instead of seeking help for his wife or calling the authorities, Bradley made a chilling decision. He fled. He grabbed a kayak, paddled across the water to a neighboring island, and tried to escape the consequences of his actions. However, it was clear that his confession was not genuine. It appeared more like a desperate attempt to rationalize what he had done and avoid full responsibility. As soon as he secured legal representation, Bradley stopped cooperating, retracting his statements and refusing to provide any further information. The inconsistencies in his story combined with the evidence left little room for doubt. Despite Bradley's attempts to downplay the severity of his actions, the truth slowly began to emerge from the shadows. The resort staff had reported that the couple's fight was not isolated to just one evening. Guests nearby had overheard them arguing repeatedly, and some recalled seeing Christy visibly upset on multiple occasions. But the night of July 8th seemed to be the final breaking point. According to witnesses, after Christy confronted Bradley about dancing provocatively with another woman at the party, the argument quickly became heated. It wasn't just a disagreement, it was a full-blown confrontation. Bradley's actions that night left an indelible mark on Christy. She had been looking forward to a lifetime of love and companionship, but in that moment it became clear that Bradley was not the man she had imagined him to be. He was more than just a partner. He was someone capable of violence. The resort's security team even saw Bradley pacing up and down the beach after the fight, a disturbing image of someone trying to make sense of the chaos they had caused. But instead of taking responsibility for his actions, he chose to escape, abandoning Christy and her life in the process. The confession Bradley later gave to the police seemed to be an attempt to avoid full accountability. He claimed that he was too drunk to remember the details of the fight, though he did remember leaving the scene in a panic. This explanation did little to absolve him. If anything, it made him seem all the more guilty, a man who fled in the middle of the night after taking the life of his wife. What was even more damning was Bradley's actions after Christy's death. When police found him on the neighboring island, he was covered in bruises and cuts, which he claimed were from falling onto coral. But his injuries weren't the only things that raised suspicions. Bradley had left behind his phone and smartwatch devices that could have easily tracked his movements, yet he had taken his wallet and passport, his means of escape. As investigators pieced together the timeline, it became clear that Bradley's intent was not to seek help but to disappear. He had paddled across the sea in the dead of night, leaving his wife's body behind, perhaps hoping that the chaos of the night would fade into oblivion. As police continued to investigate, more details came to light. The couple's fight had begun long before their arrival in Fiji, and the events of that night appeared to be the culmination of unresolved tension. Christy's friends and family spoke of a woman who had been eager to begin her life with Bradley. They described her as someone who was full of hope, someone who believed in the goodness of people and the promise of love. But as they dug deeper, they realized that the man who had claimed to be her soulmate was someone entirely different. Christy had been married to a man who, despite his outward appearance, was hiding something darker underneath. Bradley's actions, the jealousy, the controlling nature, the violent outbursts were all part of a pattern that had culminated in the tragic end to Christy's life. For Christy's family, the news of her death was incomprehensible. Her parents, who had been overjoyed to see her marry someone she loved, now found themselves facing the brutal reality that their only child was gone. The pain of losing her in such a violent and senseless way was unbearable. Christy's parents had always hoped for her happiness, but the promise of a joyful future with her new husband was shattered in an instant. They could never have imagined that their daughter's honeymoon would turn into the scene of a horrific crime. A place that was supposed to symbolize the beginning of a beautiful life, now forever marked by tragedy. As her parents traveled to Fiji to bring her remains home, they learned that Christy's injuries were so severe that her body could not be embalmed. The autopsy confirmed that blunt force trauma to the head was the cause of death, with her injuries believed to have been inflicted by the toilet lid. The sheer brutality of her death left everyone stunned. The authorities arrested Bradley upon discovering the full extent of his actions. His attempt to flee the island and avoid responsibility for his wife's death did nothing to shield him from justice. His consistent lies and efforts to manipulate the truth did not go unnoticed by those investigating the case. Despite his denials and shifting narratives, Bradley was charged with murder. His lawyer tried to argue that the crime was an accident, but it was clear to everyone involved that this was no accident. It was a deliberate, violent act. As the investigation continued, law enforcement began piecing together the puzzle that Bradley had desperately tried to mask with lies. Christie's tragic end wasn't just the result of an isolated incident, but a culmination of a pattern of controlling behavior, jealousy, and violent tendencies that Bradley had exhibited during their brief time together. Christie's friends and family were blindsided by this revelation. Many described Bradley as someone who seemed caring and genuinely in love with Christie. But those who were closest to her, especially her parents, began to suspect there was much more to his character than met the eye. Bradley's version of events, the claim that he was too drunk to remember exactly what happened, was increasingly difficult to believe. If the fight had been as innocent as he made it out to be, why did he flee the scene? Why did he attempt to evade responsibility by leaving the island in the middle of the night? Why did he intentionally leave behind his phone and smartwatch, which would have tracked his movements? Why instead did he take only his wallet and passport, as if preparing to disappear? The evidence was clear. Bradley had committed a violent act, and rather than trying to save his wife or even face the consequences of his actions, he chose to flee. His confession, which he later retracted, gave some insight into his mindset, but it was far from a coherent or reliable account of the events leading to Christie's death. For Christie's parents, the devastation of losing their only child was unbearable. Her mother in particular was heartbroken by the betrayal that had been inflicted upon her daughter, someone she had raised with so much love and care. The heartbreaking reality of Christie's final moments haunted them, knowing that she had trusted someone who, instead of protecting her, had taken her life. Christie's parents quickly began to speak out against Bradley, not just for his actions, but for the way he had manipulated the legal system. They expressed their anger and sorrow in the wake of the murder, fully aware that their daughter would never have a chance to fulfill the dreams she had worked so hard to achieve. They also faced the painful task of bringing their daughter's remains back to the United States. Due to the extent of her injuries, Christie's body could not be embalmed, forcing her family to make the gut-wrenching decision to cremate her in order to bring her home. The tragedy of this situation seemed unfathomable to anyone who knew her, let alone to her parents, who now had to carry the weight of this loss for the rest of their lives. As the case unfolded, Bradley's legal defense team began to try and discredit the evidence. They argued that the murder had been an accident, a tragic event resulting from a drunken altercation gone wrong. They pointed to the lack of premeditation and the absence of a clear intent to kill. But for anyone following the case, this defense seemed almost laughable in its attempt to soften the blow of what had truly happened. Bradley's defense attorney tried to convince the court that there was no proof of murder with intent, no evidence of premeditation, and that the events leading up to Christie's death were merely an unfortunate accident. In particular, the lawyer attempted to downplay the violence of the crime, suggesting that perhaps the injuries were inflicted in a state of drunken confusion. But no one was fooled by this narrative. One of the most telling moments in the legal proceedings occurred when Bradley attempted to justify his flight from the island. He claimed that his decision to kayak to a neighboring island in the middle of the night was driven by a need to give his wife space following an argument. The absurdity of this excuse was not lost on anyone, as it painted Bradley as a man who was just trying to cool off rather than a man trying to escape the consequences of his crime. Moreover, Bradley's attempt to manipulate the court's perception of him as a victim of circumstance only added to the general public's contempt for him. When he gave an exclusive interview to ABC News from his jail cell, he spoke with remarkable detachment about the events leading to Christie's death. His statements, full of self-pity, attempted to elicit sympathy. He claimed that he was in shock and could barely process the loss of his wife, all while continuing to downplay his actions. It was clear that he was trying to cast himself as the tragic figure in the story, trying to shift the blame away from his own horrific actions.
When I really did want to leave him, he did push me down once on the bed and chased me. He was very verbally manipulative and threatening and jealous.
The story didn't end there. Dawson's ex-girlfriend, Kristen Baker, spoke out about their relationship, saying they began dating in 2005 when they were both undergraduates at the University of Tennessee. She claimed Dawson could sometimes be jealous and controlling, even pushing her on one occasion. It's chilling to think he almost seemed like a real-life villain. One could even question how lucky she was to have gotten out when she did, because if she hadn't broken up with him when she did, she might have faced something far worse. Christy's family especially. Her parents attended the court hearings and made it clear that they would stop at nothing to ensure that justice was served. They hired their own legal team to fight for their daughter's memory, ensuring that the world knew the truth about what had happened. They were determined not to let Bradley's manipulations or his attorney's arguments distract from the facts. Bradley Dawson had taken Christy's life, and he had done so in the most brutal and senseless way. As the trial proceeded, more evidence was presented that painted Bradley in an increasingly negative light. His actions, the way he fled the island, abandoned his wife, and then concocted a web of lies to cover his tracks, spoke volumes about his character. The fact that he had been caught trying to flee, not seeking help but running away, was a clear indicator of his guilt. His attempt to manipulate the court into seeing him as an innocent bystander only made him appear more guilty in the eyes of the public. But even as the trial progressed, Bradley remained unapologetic, refusing to acknowledge the full extent of his actions. He tried to make excuses, saying that he didn't remember certain details, that it had all happened in a blur, and that the whole event had been a tragic accident. But these claims were met with skepticism from everyone involved in the case. As the trial continued, Bradley's story kept shifting. He had initially confessed to the murder, admitting that he had been the one to cause Christy's death. However, when the defense team got involved, he quickly retracted his confession, claiming that he had been coerced and that his words had been taken out of context. Despite the retraction, the authorities had already gathered enough evidence to charge him with first-degree murder. His attempts to backpedal only served to confirm the doubts about his sincerity. The fact that he had tried to flee, leaving behind evidence and fleeing with only his wallet and passport, demonstrated that he knew exactly what he had done. His actions showed that he had no intention of facing the consequences, and he thought he could escape punishment for his horrific crime. Finally, after months of legal battles, delays, and twists, the trial reached its conclusion in December 2024. After 8 days of testimony, the judge rendered a decision. Bradley Dawson was found guilty of the murder of Christy Chen. The prosecution had presented a compelling case, and the evidence against Bradley was overwhelming. The defense's arguments had failed to convince the court, and Bradley's own inconsistent statements had only hurt his case. The judge's statement was firm and clear. Bradley's actions were premeditated. His attempts to flee were evidence of guilt, and his behavior throughout the entire case showed a complete lack of remorse. The judge also noted that the defense's version of events could not be believed and was rejected entirely. The sentencing phase came shortly after the verdict. Christy's parents were given the opportunity to speak about their loss and their daughter's legacy. Christy's mother, in a tearful statement, expressed her profound grief, saying, "I hope the memories of what you did to her in her last moments haunt you, because you are a monster." No mother should have to know that this is how her daughter's life ended, and by the hands of the very person who took a vow to love, honor, and cherish her. I can only hope that the rest of your life is filled with misery, loneliness, and despair. Her father added, "She was my only child, my little girl, and my reason for living. Every day since her death has been a struggle to find meaning in a life that now feels empty." These heartfelt statements underscored the depth of their pain, knowing that they would never be able to hold their daughter again or watch her live the life she deserved. After hearing from both sides, the judge sentenced Bradley Dawson to life in prison. However, he was eligible for parole after 18 years. The family was devastated by this decision, as they felt that Bradley should never be released. Many others, including the public, shared this sentiment. His actions were unforgivable, and his attempt to manipulate the system had only made his crimes more apparent. The story of Christy Chen and Bradley Dawson is not just one of a honeymoon gone tragically wrong. It is a reminder of the unpredictability of human behavior. In the aftermath of Christie's death, her parents were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. They had to make difficult decisions about her funeral, the cremation of her remains, and how to live with the haunting knowledge that the person they once welcomed into their family had destroyed their daughter's life in the most horrifying way imaginable. But Christie's legacy lives on in the memories of the people who loved her. Despite the pain and loss, her family and friends have vowed to keep her memory alive. They have spoken out about the importance of love, respect, and trust in relationships, and have reminded others that the facade of a perfect life can often hide the most dangerous truths. As the trial revealed, Bradley Dawson was not the man he presented himself to be. On the surface, he appeared charming, caring, and dedicated, someone who worked with troubled youth and was even praised for his efforts. However, his actions told a completely different story. Behind his carefully crafted persona lay a man with controlling tendencies, jealousy, and a temper that could not be contained when faced with conflict. The impact of Christie's death rippled through not only her family and close friends, but also her larger community. Christie had touched the lives of many people throughout her journey, whether as a talented pastry chef in Denver, a dedicated pharmacist in Memphis, or simply as a compassionate friend who cared deeply about the well-being of others. Her kindness and work ethic were well known, and it was hard for many to fathom that someone who appeared so full of life could be taken so violently. The tragedy of her death forced people to reflect on the nature of domestic violence, even in seemingly happy relationships. Friends and family who had seen Christie and Bradley together could not have imagined the horrors that would unfold. Her death, like so many other cases of intimate partner violence, serves as a harsh reminder that the outward appearances of a relationship can often mask deeper issues. The idea that someone could go from professing love and making vows of devotion to committing such a heinous act is a painful realization, especially for those left behind who struggle to understand how such violence could erupt so suddenly. The trial itself was an emotional roller coaster, with every piece of evidence and testimony building a picture of who Bradley Dawson truly was, a man who had betrayed his wife, her family, and his own conscience. As much as the legal proceedings provided clarity, they could not undo the damage done. Christie's parents had to live through the horror of hearing how their daughter's life had been taken, how she had fought in her final moments, and how Bradley had attempted to cover up his crime by fleeing the scene. But despite the overwhelming grief, there was a sense of justice when the verdict was delivered. Bradley was found guilty of Christie's murder, and the evidence ranging from his attempt to flee the scene to his inconsistent confessions left no doubt in the minds of the jury or the public. For Christie's family, while the verdict could never bring her back, it did offer some solace, knowing that Bradley would face the consequences of his actions. The judge's decision to sentence Bradley to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 18 years was met with mixed reactions. Many people, including Christie's family, felt that he should never be allowed to walk free again. His actions were premeditated, and his attempt to flee the island only served to demonstrate his guilt. His cold indifference to Christie's death, his refusal to take responsibility for what he had done, and his attempt to manipulate the justice system made it clear that he was a dangerous man unworthy of freedom. Christie's family has vowed to continue their fight for justice, ensuring that Bradley's future will be one spent behind bars where he can never harm another innocent person. They also continue to advocate for victims of domestic violence, hoping to raise awareness of the subtle signs of abuse and encourage others to seek help before it is too late. One of the lingering questions in this case is whether Bradley Dawson should ever be allowed to see the light of day again. The possibility of parole after 18 years is something that has left many people, especially Christie's family, feeling uneasy. For them, no amount of time served could ever make up for the pain they will carry for the rest of their lives. They believe that Bradley should never be given the opportunity to walk free again, not just because of the brutality of his crime, but because of the lack of remorse he showed throughout the entire process. From the moment of the murder to his attempts to manipulate the court system, Bradley's behavior has been nothing short of reprehensible. While Bradley Dawson may one day be given the chance to apply for parole, it is clear that Christie's legacy will not be forgotten. Her life, though tragically cut short, was one of love, kindness, and hard work. She was a woman who had so much more to offer the world, and her memory will live on through the people who knew and loved her. Christy's parents, devastated by the loss of their daughter, have dedicated themselves to keeping her memory alive. They have turned their grief into action, speaking out for those who cannot speak for themselves, and shining a light on the issue of domestic violence. They hope that by sharing their story, others will be inspired to recognize the signs of abuse before it is too late and to take action to protect themselves and those they love. The case of Christy Chen and Bradley Dawson is a powerful reminder of how quickly a life can be taken and how important it is to recognize the warning signs of abuse in relationships. While the story is one of devastating loss, it is also one of resilience. Christy's legacy lives on in the hearts of her family, friends, and anyone who hears her story. Thank you all for watching today's story. If you found it meaningful, please support me by hitting the like button, subscribing to the channel, and sharing this video with others so we can all learn how to protect ourselves and stay away from toxic relationships. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.